Okay, let's take a look at the latest graduate of our 8-week technique program. And the bottom video is in December 2023, and the top video is March 25th, 2024. So let's just take a look at the stroke in each. He was pretty good when he started. You're going to see I'm moving him forward at the bottom. You can see as he reaches forward, he's got, make it a little bit bigger, he's got nice ankle flexion. His hips are pretty forward. He's got the symmetry that you see in a lot of the top paddlers, where their lower legs from their knee to their ankles and their upper body are pretty much parallel. You see that in most of the top paddlers. And he's also got a similar symmetry where if we kind of draw a line parallel to his lower legs and his upper body, there's some symmetry there. That angle is pretty much equal but opposite that the blade makes with the water. So he was already pretty good. But a couple of things are noticeable. I'll just advance the more recent version and make it a little bit larger for comparison. And so the first thing that we notice is that in a more recent video, his hips are a little bit further forward. So if we look at the back of his butt, it's ahead of his heels. And when he first started, he was shooting his bum out behind him a little bit more to counterbalance the weight of his upper body getting forward, just to give him a little bit more stability. Now, I should make it clear that in rough water, that's a good strategy, but when you're in flat water like this, you really ought to try to keep your hips forward as much as you can. It helps you get more weight in the blade, and it forces you to get the blade buried more quickly at the catch. And then the idea is that when you get out in rougher water, you're going to have your butt go out behind you a little bit more. But if you do it better in flat water, you're going to tend to do it better, a better job in rough water with this, and that will help you catch better and get more weight on your blade, even in the rough water. The other thing that we see is, and it's a fine difference, but it's a nuanced difference, but it's still a difference, is the angle of his paddling sidearm and his torso is greater in his more recent video than it was at the beginning. We also see that he's got a little bit more positive blade angle at this point, and a little bit more reach than he had initially. And that's without overstretching or overreaching. This current video looks very comfortable. Now let's look to see how quickly he gets the blade buried at the catch. And you can see that in the initial video, his blade contacted the water, and then his bottom hand is going down and coming back a little bit as the blade enters the water. And as a consequence, there's a fair amount of blade travel to get the blade buried. It's still very good by most standards, and he's still got some positive blade angle, which is great. But let's look at the more recent version on the top, and you're going to see that his blade contacts the water and it gets buried more quickly. And you can see that his bottom hand, his paddling side hand, stays forward. He's thinking about keeping that bottom hand forward. I call that reaching to catch, rather than pulling to catch like he was doing initially. He wasn't doing it badly, but he was doing it. And as a consequence, you can see that he gets his blade buried much more quickly now than he did in December. And you can see that he's got a little bit more blade angle and a little bit longer effective stroke. You can also see that he's lower now than he was before. And you can also see that he's bent over a bit more from the waist, so he's getting a little bit more upper body weight on the blade as well. And then let's just watch as he advances through the pull. We're going to see that he does a pretty decent job of conserving blade angle in December. And let's just see how well he conserves blade angle now. You can see he's pulling his blade through the water, and very slowly as his positive angle decaying. So, you know, that part is pretty similar. One thing I'll notice is that he seems to, when he's pulling here, I see a little bit more compression in the legs. His legs bend a bit more and his hips move back a little bit more during the pulling phase than they did in December. You'll see in December, he bends at the upper body, bends at his waist, but his legs don't really bend anymore during the pull. So he's not using his legs to get the blade really any deeper into the water. And his hips are already pretty far behind his heels, and they don't really move back at all during this pulling phase. So he's not really driving his hips or driving the stroke with his hips compared to what he is doing now, where you see he's got his hips are a little bit further forward, and you can see as he's pulling and his legs bend a little bit more, you can see his hips go back a little bit more. So again, it's a subtle difference because he was pretty good to start with, but he's clearly driving with his hips more now than he was in December. And then let's get them to the same spot in the stroke and center him up now. Okay, and then lastly, let's look to see, all of that is what I call loading, where he's loading force onto the blade. And then now let's watch him unload. And the idea in good paddling is that as soon as you've finished loading, you should begin to unload. And generally speaking, that is about the point where your bottom hand's in front of your knee, more or less your top hand is in front of your face or just above your head. Your blade is just passing through vertical. There's still a good distance between your blade and your feet that you can use to pull yourself to the paddle. And then you should start to come up. And the way to come up or to unload is not with the tiny muscles at the base of your back. It's by using the muscles between your chest and your knees, so basically your muscles at the front of your body and your core, to pull your hips forward towards the paddle. So you're literally standing up into or towards the paddle. And so let's just watch to see how well he did that in December. You can see right away he's starting to come up. But I also noticed that, so you can see his head moving ever so slightly in that direction. However, I'm also noticing that as much as his head's coming up, more his shoulders are rotating. His bottom shoulder's going that way and his top shoulder's going this way. So you just watch. So he's not coming up a lot and he's losing a lot of blade angle. And it's not until he gets pretty close to his feet here where you really start to see his head come up. And you can see the blade's at his feet now and he's still coming up. He pulls the blade out of the water just past his feet. That's okay. But he's still really bent over. His bum's sticking way out behind him. And the blade's out of the water. His hips have not started to move forward yet. And now that the blade's out of the water, his hips are moving forward. Beginning to move your hips forward or reloading them forward when the paddle blade is out of the water and unsupported actually creates an impulse that slightly moves the board backwards. So it would break some of the forward speed of the board. Now let's compare what he was doing in December to now. And you're going to see that almost immediately upon finishing loading, he's starting to come up. Watch his head come up. He's wearing the same white hat as he was in December. Watch that white hat come up, 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 up. And as it's coming up, watch his legs straightening and his hips moving forward. And we can see his hips moving forward if we look at the back of his bum in relation to his heels. And so you can see right now there's a gap. And as he's coming up, that gap is closing. Right? So he gets to this point and now the back of his bum is almost level with his heels. So he's standing up into the paddle. And the paddle at this point is still in the water. It's still buried. It's starting to come out, but it's still buried. And I'm just going to back December's up so you can see the difference. So he's come up considerably more now than he was then. But watch what happens in the last little bit here, because he's going to shift his focus from the front of his body, the muscles between his chest and his knees, and he's going to shift that focus to his glutes. He's going to squeeze his glutes and push his hips forward under his body. So basically, at this point, the blade is at his feet in both instances. And if the blade's at your feet, you cannot pull yourself to the paddle anymore. You're at the paddle. So now you have to start to think about how you're going to push yourself past the paddle. And the way to push yourself past the paddle is to push your hips forward in this direction while the blade is still in the water and pressuring water in this direction. And what will happen is the muscles of your glutes and your legs, and to a lesser degree your core, is going to be engaged against the load on your paddle, and you're going to be pushing yourself past the paddle as you exit the water. So really, in good paddling, you create that push, and then that is the cue to lift your blade out of the water. All right? You'll see that in December, there was no push at all with his glutes. He just lifted the blade out of the water. His hips are not really moving forward. He's staying bent over. The blade comes out of the water, and then slowly his hips move forward for the next stroke. And watch what he does in March 2024. You can see right now how his hips are moving forward, to the point where when the blade's finally out of the water, his hips are almost level with his heels. His bum is not sticking way out behind him. He is much straighter, and so he's got a better push off of the exit, and that's going to create more speed through the air work. His board's going to carry more speed through the air work. So, in my opinion, he's made some pretty substantial improvements in the last couple of months, and the point he was starting from, which was pretty good, means it's harder to find improvements than if your technique is pretty raw and disorganized. It's a little bit harder to find the type of improvement that he's finding here, and so he's done quite a good job of improving his stroke from a stroke that was already pretty good to start with.